So I think without any further ado, and in the interests of keeping to time, we'll move on now to the first paper. As I said, we're focusing today on an area we've described as Central Northern Europe. This encompasses, for the purposes of today, Flanders, Denmark, the Czech Republic and Germany. And the first area we're going to hear from is from Ewoud Deschepper, who is giving a paper put together with colleagues Wim de Clerq, Gerben, Verbrugge and Johan Hoorne. Ewoud is currently finishing his PhD on early medieval rural settlement in Western Flanders at Ghent University. His research focuses on early medieval settlement developments, building traditions and settlement forms, and other interests include long-term landscape development and the rural economy. His colleague Wim de Clerq is Professor of Historical Archaeology at Ghent University. His particular interests are the characterization of and development in rural settlement in Flanders from the Roman period to the modern age. He founded and leads the Historical Archaeology Research Group, an active group of researchers studying all aspects of historical archaeology in Belgium and Europe. Gerben Verbrugge defended his PhD in archaeology at Ghent University in November 2020 on the subject of high medieval rose settlements in Flanders and in the context of Flemish migration to the south of Wales. He is currently affiliated to the Department of Geography at Ghent University as a guest professor in landscape research. And Johan Hoorne has more than 15 years of experience in contract archaeology. In 2012, he co-founded the archaeological contractor De Logi Archaeology, which has since then carried out 300 projects. The focus of the company is on rural archaeology in Western Flanders, covering all periods. His personal interests are the Bronze and Iron Age eras and the medieval period in particular. So it's a fantastic range of speakers we've got contributing to the paper that Ewoud is going to present. So Ewoud, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me clearly and can see the presentation. Thank you for this introduction and for organizing this interesting seminar. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ewoud, and I will introduce you to the topic of medieval settlement archaeology and infrastructure archaeology in the Flemish region of Belgium. So I represent a larger group of people, and you can see their names on the slides. The aim of our paper is first to offer a schematic outline of the historical and current organization of archaeology in Flanders. And then I will present the impact of this legislative and organizational changes on medieval archaeology, more specifically focusing on the modern-day provinces of West and East Flanders. And this will then be followed by the presentation of several case studies that will illustrate the contribution of infrastructure archaeology to our knowledge of medieval rural society in the region. Now, as famously known, Belgium is quite a complex country in terms of its administration. It's a federal state now, comprising of 3 regions, and in the north lies the Dutch-speaking Flemish region or Flanders. Different responsibilities were transferred from the federal state to the regions at different points in time, and as such, archaeology became a regional responsibility in 1989. In the Middle Ages, the western part of modern-day Flanders was part of the County of Flanders, one of the more powerful polities of that time. And in this paper, we will therefore focus on the 2 modern-day provinces of West and East Flanders that were part of this medieval county. Now, for the sake of clarity, the common chronological markers used to subdivide the medieval period in Flanders and in Belgium are given on this slide, as they differ a bit from subdivisions used in other European countries. In this paper, we will focus on the early and high medieval periods. And for reference, this map shows the location of the largest medieval and modern cities in the region in relation to the soil map. So in the first section of this paper, we will talk about the development of the legislative framework on archaeology. Now, before and during the 1980s, there were two predominant kinds of archaeology in Flanders: academic archaeology on the one hand, and on the other hand, what can be called leisure archaeology, with volunteers carrying out archaeological research. And the scale of these projects generally was small. During the 1980s and 1990s, the first watching briefs on infrastructure projects took place. This involved small and larger scale excavation directly ahead or during development, as can be seen on this aerial photograph of one of such rescue excavations. In the 1990s, preventive archaeology was slowly developed following the 1993 Archaeology Decree, the first Flemish legislation on archaeology. This decree followed the spirit of the Malta Valletta Convention, but did not explicitly contain all of its elements. One important principle that was adopted, however, was that of zorgplicht in Dutch, which means that developers had to pay for archaeological research in advance of the actual development. In reality, however, this new legislation was only slowly adopted, and its impact only is noticeable from the mid to late 1990s onwards. It's only from 2002 onwards that the 1993 decree became more or less systematically implemented. And as a result, there was a marked increase in the quantity of archaeological work, and a true market for archaeological research emerged. This market was organized in a commercial way, with private contractors carrying out archaeological research. This growing quantity of archaeological research since the beginning of the 21st century is clearly visible on this graph. And then a new increase is evident from 2016 onwards, which can be explained by a new legislative framework that came into effect that year. And we will now shortly discuss that framework. The Valletta Convention was only ratified by the Flemish government in 2010. And this ratification gave way to a new legislative framework, which was then ultimately implemented only in 2016. This new decree solidified the organization of archaeology as a predominant preventive development-led activity that is carried out within the context of a commercial market system. The new decree also puts a strong emphasis on evaluative research prior to development. And this new law outlines three possible trajectories for archaeological research. The first and most important one links archaeology to development. Two other smaller paths involve a question-led scientific approach and the study of chance finds that occur during development. And in the following slides, we will focus only on this development-led archaeology. Thus, current legislation in Flanders states that the developer needs to instigate evaluative archaeological research in order to receive the building permit. The law implements certain minimal areas below which this evaluative research is not needed. With regards to rural contexts, in practice, this means that evaluative research is only needed for the development of housing estates larger than 3,000 square meters, and for the development of industrial or agricultural uses above 5,000 square meters. And the goal of this evaluative research is naturally to determine the presence and nature of an archaeological site on the terrain to be developed, and to assess the need for and nature of any future research. Now, the research methods applied in these evaluative projects can be grouped according to their impact on the buried archaeological heritage, but nevertheless they can be combined within the same project. And these diagrams show the proportion of applied research methods in evaluative research in 2020. On your left, you can see that desktop research, trial trenches, and coring dominate, with other non-invasive methods such as field walking and geophysical research only seeing scarce adoption. And same conclusion can be drawn from the diagram on the right, which shows the proportion of combined research methods of projects finished in 2020. Now, in terms of the detection of medieval sites and settlements, trial trenching is the most important method. It was introduced in Flemish archaeology in the 1990s in the context of large linear infrastructure works. From 2002 onwards, it has become the main evaluation method in non-covered landscapes. And this methodology entails the use of continuous parallel trenches 12 to 15 meters apart, with added observation windows to evaluate denser zones or particular features. In a best practice scenario, the coverage of these trenches and observation windows is circa 15% of the total terrain. In practice, however, generally 12.5% is seen as a minimum coverage. And this methodology of continuous parallel trenches with observation windows was particularly developed between 2005 to 2007 by Ghent University following French methods. Then some 130 hectares were systematically screened in the context of the development of new harbor infrastructure. And these are some further examples of this methodology. In contrast to trial trenching, geophysical research is scarcely used in preventive archaeology in Flanders. A noteworthy exception is the site of Kokzijde Golf, located in the coastal plain, where an area of some 19 hectares was scanned. Now, despite its poor adoption, the example of Kokzijde, as you can see on this slide, as well as academic research, shows the great potential of geophysical research to detect large archaeological site complexes in Flanders, in covered as well as in non-covered landscapes. Geophysical research is more widely applied in academic contexts. For example, at Dutzele Kruisabelenstraat, geophysical research on parcels around a small-scale excavation, which is outlined in yellow. Geophysical research there was able to reveal the existence of a much larger and complex medieval ditch system. Another example is the site of Nieuw Roeselare, where geophysical methods were applied to study a lost medieval village. Now, after this short excursion on evaluative methods, we return to the organization of archaeological practice in Flanders. Now, the evaluative stage has as goal to assess the presence and nature of an archaeological site and also to outline the measures that need to be taken. And the law has 4 different options, some of which can be combined. The first one is that no archaeological site is present and that no measures have to be taken. The second one involves in situ preservation, often by making certain changes to the development plans so that the archaeological site is not disturbed. A third option entails further research on the samples or finds collected during the evaluative stage. And the last option is the excavation of the terrain as a whole or of certain parts of it. This graph shows the proportion of measures outlined after evaluative research for the period between 2016 and 2020. And this shows that the part of sites that see excavation is steady around 12%. However, as we have seen, as archaeological research as a whole increases in Flanders, the amount of archaeological research increases, This means that the overall area that is excavated every year has steadily increased since 2016. In 2020, a drop is noted, which in part can be attributed to the corona measures that were installed in Flanders. Now, in the second part of this presentation, I want to explain how this general increase in archaeological research has impacted on medieval archaeology and has created a large data set. This graph shows the number of discovered medieval rural settlements per year in the provinces of West and East Flanders. It's clear that the subsequent legislative frameworks, which led to a quantitative increase of excavations as a whole, also have led to an increase in the number of known rural settlements. Currently, more than 80 early medieval and more than 180 high medieval rural settlements have been excavated partially or to a larger extent. And the same trend is observed with regards to the number of known medieval main building plans. And this map shows the geographical distribution of the known medieval rural settlements in the white circles in relation to the spatial density of invasive archaeological research that has been carried out. And this is shown in shades of red. This makes clear that the known settlements are located in well-studied regions as well as in areas that have seen less archaeological research so far. Furthermore, the map shows the trajectory of a number of important linear infrastructure projects. And this shows that these linear projects also target areas that have seen lower amounts of archaeological work. Although there has been a clear and important increase in the number of known medieval rural settlements over the past 30 years, this is not the only important thing. More precisely, the size of the excavated surface also matters, because small-scale excavations naturally do not allow a full assessment of settlement form or development. Furthermore, these smaller scale excavations tend to target areas on terrains to be developed that are dense in archaeological features, while so-called off-site or non-site locations or areas with less dense archaeology are ignored or left alone. Of course, these less dense areas are equally important to our understanding of medieval settlement form, medieval settlement patterns, and settlement development. In terms of surface area, 75% of known early and high medieval settlements have been discovered through excavations that encompass than 1.5 hectares or 15,000 square meters. And 50% of known medieval settlements has even been excavated over an area below 7,000 square meters. In other words, the smaller portion of sites excavated over larger surfaces is very important to our understanding of medieval rural settlement. These larger excavations in Flanders usually are the result of infrastructure projects. More precisely, most of them are large-scale open area projects. These are defined here as a single excavation, a complex of nearby excavations, of which the total excavated surface exceeds 1 hectare. A second type of infrastructure archaeology in Flanders involves the systematic following of linear infrastructure projects, and such projects also tend to bypass currently built-up areas, and therefore they offer insights into the use of landscapes that can be defined as marginal in an economic sense, both from a historical as well as from a modern point of view. This map again shows the known medieval rural settlements, grouped according to whether their discovery is related to a large-scale open area project in yellow or to a linear project in red. And it's clear that these infrastructure projects have been very important to our knowledge of medieval rural settlement in the region. Now I will show some case studies. this regard. A first example is related to linear infrastructure projects. It concerns a coastal landscape located between the cities of Bruges and Ghent. Here, sporadic archaeological research since the 1990s revealed the presence of pottery production, but its exact scale, nature, and importance of artisanal production remained unknown. Until in 2014 and 2015, the construction of a new gas pipe, the Fluxys project, revealed a large number of new sites that can be linked to this artisanal production. More precisely, this involved the discovery of a large proto-industrial kiln site, as well as several tile and brick kilns on locations along the linear project. And overall, these excavations have shown that the whole landscape from the later 9th century onwards was an active pottery production landscape. Here you can see one of the larger medieval pottery kilns. And this is the excavation plan of the proto-industrial kiln site, showing the location of the kilns and of concentrations of extraction pits. And this is one of the tile kilns that was discovered. In terms of our understanding of medieval rural settlements, especially large-scale open area projects have proven to be essential. Numerous of these projects have been carried out over the course of the last 15 years, and I will highlight 3 of them here. It is important to note that these are the largest archaeological projects carried out in Flanders. And while the surfaces of the evaluated areas are definitely impressive, the subsequent excavations often target much smaller areas or are carried out in a highly fragmented way, which hinders the assessment of the archaeological evidence. A perfect example of this last point is a project at De Loop. This site sees the development of a new city district, and since 2007, an area of some 40 hectares have been evaluated with trial trenches, while some 20 hectares have been effectively excavated, but this followed the rate of development and thus occurred in a very scattered way, as is clear from this general excavation plan. Nevertheless, the excavations brought to light an important multi-period site that sees occupation since the final Neolithic, and is also involved in early and high settlement.
2 minutes, Ewoud.
A recent research project brought together this scattered information and was able to reconstruct the development of the medieval settlement in great detail. The second project is that of Kluizendok, which we already have discussed. 130 hectares have been screened, 15 hectares have been excavated. This revealed an extensive Roman settlement that was abandoned over the course of the 3rd century. Dark earth layers developed then in the fills of the Roman water wells, and ecological research on these layers was able to reconstruct the regeneration of forest on this location in greater detail. The appearance of charcoal pits in the 10th century testifies to a more intensive exploitation of this forest from then onwards. This research confirms historical accounts that characterize the area as an important forest during medieval times. Now, I will skip, unfortunately, through our last example. These 2. Now, in a more general sense, this recent increase of the data sets on medieval rural settlements also allowed to study several aspects in greater detail. Among other things, rural building traditions and settlement forms. To conclude, infrastructure archaeology has been very important in the overall development of archaeological legislation and practice in Flanders. And this new legislation in turn led to a quantitative growth of archaeological research. Regarding medieval settlement, the data sets thus created are now large enough to allow the first synthesizing studies. Especially large-scale projects are important in this regard. While new insights have been gained, other topics remain understudied for now. A factor that might help to turn this around is the creation of a yearly budget by the Flemish government to allow synthesis research. The data increase, however, also makes thorough quality control of individual projects necessary. Nevertheless, the increasing amount of research over the past 15 years starts to lead to new and better understandings of medieval rural settlement. And on this note, I want to conclude our paper and thank you for your attention.